I appreciate Patricia's message because in some ways it's connected with mine, and I had not actually talked to her about it or anything, but it just worked out that way. As you know, I'm going through the commandments, and today last time we covered the fifth commandment, which is honor your father and your mother. Then the next commandment soon after that says, thou shalt not murder. That's the next commandment. 3 days ago, I was watching a program on TV called Breakout. How many of you have watched that program, Breakout? It comes on National Geographic. I think most of you will not really be that interested in it. I just saw it, so I said, hey, why not have a look at it, see how the program is. Now, this particular, it's a series, and this particular episode all these are true stories actually, is about how basically this Breakout is about how convicts escape from jail. That's what they do to escape from jail. Now, this particular episode was talking about 7 convicts who were serving life terms for murder, and they decided to break out of the high security prison in which they were housed. It all started with one man, a very creative guy there, who really wanted to get out of prison, and he thought he would succeed. So he talked to a few others who were his trusted friends, 6 other convicts. So he recruited them, and they planned the escape to the T. They thought of every single thing they could. And those convicts in jail, they don't have much work to do. So they have a lot of time on their hands, so they can sit and think and decide and plan on what they want to do. Now, many of these people who joined him were working in the maintenance department, and so they had access to the entire prison because they would go and do repairs or whatever, plumbing, anything, electrical problems or whatever that was there. They would look after that and repair them. Now, they all planned what they would do, and I won't go into all the details of what they did, but they decided to execute it one day. And they succeeded in escaping, but in the process, they had beaten and bound most of the prison guards and killed one of them in the process of trying to escape. After they escaped, they went to a shop selling guns. And this is in the US, so their guns are freely sold in shops. Not in all shops, but in the shops that specifically handle this kind of work. So they went into the shop and took over the shop and started selecting the guns that they would require to be used because they knew they were going to be chased, and they were going to be they'll try to be trapped and taken back to jail. But while they had gone into the shop and held up the shop and the owner of the shop, there was a lady outside that saw these 7 fellows getting inside this gun shop, and she recognized them from the newspaper pictures that had come out about them, because there was a big manhunt going on to get hold of them. So she suspected they were the same people, and so she called 911. One lone police officer got the message. Okay, they contacted him because he was very close by to this particular shop, and they asked him, just go and investigate, because this lady said, I'm not sure. They appear to be those kind of people. I don't know what they are doing in the shop, but they've gone in and they are there. So this police officer went to investigate. Now what happened is, there was one of those men, convicts, was watching the road and watching everything to make sure that nobody actually interrupts them, while these others were kind of loading up on the best of guns they could get and ammunition and everything. He saw this car pull up, this police car pull up, and he had a gun in his hand. He shot that man even before he could properly get out of the car. He didn't even wait to ask questions. He just shot him. So a great manhunt took place involving many police officers in many different states, and even a dog squad, and even helicopters trying to get this man. And eventually they ended up killing 4 of the convicts and capturing 3 of the convicts who were given death sentence. Of course, when you do something like this, you get the death sentence, and they were on death row. Now, when I looked at this program, I was watching this program, I thought to myself, why do we allow murderers to survive? Why do we allow them to live? Is it worth it? Now, if we followed the law of God that said that if anyone kills someone, he should be put to death. If we follow that, and that's what the Bible tells us, there would be no prison breaks. There would be very few prison breaks. There wouldn't be any loss of innocent lives, or more loss of innocent lives, and unnecessary expense to the innocent taxpayer in every country in the world. As a matter of fact, thousands of dollars of public money is spent every year because of our prison system. Is it worth it? That was what came to my mind when I thought about it. Is it really worth it? Some of these things were mentioned in the program itself of how much money is spent when these people to look after convicts who are in prison. Now, that was a good point. I thought it was a really good thing that it came to mind about what the Bible says and how important it is for us to follow God's instructions in the Bible, because they really are meant for our good. Now, you can see in this particular case, and eventually those three of them are going to die, or who knows whether they will die or just be languishing in prison for the rest of their lives. We don't know. Sometimes they do remain in prison for the rest of their lives. Nobody really puts them to death. So when you think about this, this commandment was on my mind. I was preparing this sermon, and I thought to myself, do any of us in this room, do we consider ourselves murderers? Okay. Do any of us even think of murdering someone else? And will any of us ever murder anyone else? I don't think there's a single person in this room who is a murderer. Because if you were, most likely you would have got caught and you would be in jail, not sitting here in this room. So why are we discussing this commandment? I mean, why did God put this commandment in the Bible? Is it just talking about killing somebody here, or does this involve much more than killing it? What does this murder really talk about? And Parisha brought up this point. He says that if you get angry, so angry with someone that you wish that person dead. Have any of us thought about that sometimes? Okay, if we did, we are murderers. So all of us fall in. We have broken this commandment if we got very angry with someone. In God's sight, we will be considered murderers. And that is amplified. So let's look at this, and we begin to realize that this involves, the laws of God involves much more than the physical aspect of the law, what is the apparent action in our lives. This law involves much more. God looks on the heart, and He says that if anyone hates his brother, he is a murderer. And we look at those scriptures also. Now let us, before we actually go into this aspect of murder, let us first think about what this commandment does not mean. Okay, it does not mean, and what it actually means. It does not mean killing animals. In Old Testament times, they sacrificed animals to God, and God actually ordained those sacrifices to take place. Jesus ate the Passover lamb. So Passover lamb had to be killed, and Jesus himself ate it, and he still did not sin. So that means, obviously, under this law of murder, killing of animals does not come into the picture, and we'll see why it doesn't. It's not considered wrong to kill animals. Many of the disciples were fishermen and killed many fish to make a living. Okay, that was not wrong either. Soon after God giving the 10 Commandments to the nation of Israel, He mentioned many ordinances that they were to keep, and He said that in that one of the ordinances, He says that if a thief enters your house and you kill him or beat him up and he dies because you are defending yourself and defending your house, it is not considered murder. And the person should not be punished as a murderer because he has killed a thief that entered his house. Jesus himself justified this idea when he said in Matthew chapter 24 verse 43, you need not turn there, Matthew 24 verse 43, he says, but understand this, if the owner of the house had known at what time of night the thief was coming, he would have kept watch and would not have let his house be broken into. Now we can see very well the implication of these particular words. Is if you know someone is going to come to your house to steal, what will you do? I mean, if there's a police, you will inform the police. But otherwise, what will you do? You will keep, if you have a hockey stick or a bat in your house, or you'll have a big knife or whatever you have as weapons, you'll keep that all ready. Okay, your dog, everything. You'll keep them all ready because you know the thief is going to come and you're going to have to stop him. And even if it is necessary, if he dies or he's killed, you'll do that also. So that was justified, but why did God make an exception for man? Why did He say that you cannot kill another human being? Why did He say that? It goes way back. It goes way back to the beginning of the creation of man and woman. We see first the example of Cain, who became the first murderer, and God punished him for his sin of murder. Obviously, Adam and Eve knew that it was wrong to murder someone. Okay. Now, one of the reasons why God brought the flood over the world was the people had become so terrible and so bad in the way they lived, so terrible that murder, violence, was very rampant. Rape, violence, murder was rampant in those days. People killed each other at the drop of a hat. There was no respect at all for human life. No respect. So God said, the world has become so bad, the people in the world is so bad, they had to destroy the whole world. One of the things that God did immediately when Noah came out of the ark, when the flood receded, Noah came out of the ark, is mentioned in Genesis chapter 9 verse 6. We'll read Genesis chapter 9 verse 6.
Whoever sheds the blood of man, the man shall his blood be shed. When the image of God has brought dead man.
Yeah, He said that you don't show mercy to a murderer. If he sheds blood, his blood should be shed. Now, I am not advocating here that we should follow it in this land or anywhere else. If I was to do that, all the human rights and people would come after me. And okay, they have got a place in this world, but there are obviously some things that we need to do in respect to serious crimes of this kind that we aren't doing and we should be doing in not only in this country, in the whole world. If we don't, we suffer the penalty of that. And why should we not take the blood of another or kill another human being? Is because God made us in His image. That's the difference. God made human beings in His image. He forbids the wanton, intentional taking of human life. Man was made for eternity, and God has invested a tremendous amount of Himself for man. That's what makes man so valuable. Every man and woman on this earth is valuable to Him. Past, present and future, they are invaluable to Him. And therefore, we have no right to take the life of another human being, because in doing so, we are restricting God's work with each and every individual person. We are cutting short the work that God is going to do with that particular human being. He has got a plan for that human being. He has got a plan for all of us. Some of us die young, some of us die old, some of us die somewhere in the middle, some of us die at birth. Only God knows why He allows that to happen. But when you die, your work on earth is finished. That's why God allows you to die. And it does not matter how young or old you may be. Your work on earth, the work that God has planned for you, has been finished. And God says, okay, it's up, time is up. You leave this earth. Because this is not the only destiny of ours. We have got a destiny which goes far beyond that. That's it. So we should not grieve necessarily. We do grieve when someone dies. We should not grieve. If God has taken that person away, we should not grieve. But we have no right to take someone else's life prematurely. No right. And God is going to hold us responsible if we do so. But you know what? In the world, after man lost the meaning and the purpose of human beings and what God is doing on the earth, human life became cheap. Even today things have changed, but a few years, maybe 100 or 200 years down the road ago, human life was very cheap. There were many countries, most religions, most cultures don't give much value to human life. There is only one religion that gives immense value to human life, and that is Christianity. And even there, Christians themselves have done things wrong. In 1844, you could buy a Fijian or an American, a Fijian or an African man or woman for a little less or just about $7, which in 1844 would be roughly around 60 or 70 rupees. You could buy a Fijian man or an African man or woman for that price. After you have purchased him or her, you could feed him, starve him, work him, whip him, or eat him. And believe it, people did eat their slaves, okay. There were some people and some cultures that did that. There was very little value to human life in those days. Today, you cannot go to Fiji or Africa and purchase a human being for even $7 million. Okay. And you know why? Why did this happen? It's because these people now know the Bible. They know the Bible. In Fiji, there are more than 1,200 Christian chapels and churches in Fiji. In 1844, there were no churches or chapels in Fiji. The people believed in a totally different religion. They had no value. Everyone was treated the same. Human life, animal life, no difference. Because of Christianity, everything has changed today. As a matter of fact, most countries consider human trafficking illegal, and it can even attract the death penalty if somebody actually sells a human being. And all this because of what the Bible has done. People have learned the laws of God, and they have realized that something has to be done about it. Let's go to 1 Peter chapter 1 verses 18 to 22. 1 Peter 1 verses 18 to 22.
For you know that it was not with perishable things such as silver or gold that you were redeemed from the empty way of life handed down to you from your ancestors, but with the precious blood of Christ, a lamb without blemish or defect. He was chosen before the creation of the world, but was revealed in these last times for your sake. Through him you believe in God, who raised him from the dead and glorified him, and so your faith and hope are in God.
Yeah, if I'll read to you from the Message Bible also, it makes it a little bit clear. It says, it cost God plenty to get you out of that dead-end, empty-headed life you grew up in. He paid with Christ's sacred blood, you know. He died like an unblemished sacrificial lamb, and this was no afterthought. Even though he has only lately, at the end of his ages, become public knowledge, God always knew he was going to do this for you. It's because of this sacrificed Messiah, whom God then raised from the dead and glorified, that you trust God, that you know you have a future in God. Now that you're cleaned up your lives by following the truth. Love one another as if your life depends on it. And it's amazing how this thing is mentioned here. It's because of Jesus Christ, because of what happened, because He ordained that from the very beginning, even before He created man. It showed how important it was. God created us and in advance had designed our destiny in advance. We were precious to Him. We are precious to Him at all times. A few days ago in the Indian newspaper, a judgment was passed in which it said that anyone who is convicted of rape a second time should be put to death. And I said, this is great. Because what rape does, is murder. What rape does is, you may not kill that person, but what rape does, it kills the spirit in that person, allows the person to live for the rest of their lives in trauma. So in some ways it's worse than death. Rape is worse than death. Or in the same way, an acid attack on a woman is something that causes deep scars within, not just on the outside. It's easier to kill a person, easier for a person to just die. Somebody kills them and the person just dies. This is living for a kind of a death for the rest of their lives. More and more countries are taking serious notice of these kind of things that are considered as good as murder, should be considered even worse than murder. Another type of murder is suicide. And again, we see the newspapers talk a lot about suicide. It's another kind of murder. Now, we should not judge people who commit suicide because we don't really know the circumstances or even the stress they have been through. Sometimes it can cause temporary insanity. So, I don't know how God deals with those kind of things, but then we cannot be judge of those kind of things. As a matter of fact, many countries are even wondering whether they should make it a serious crime if a person actually commits suicide. But actually, the Bible considers suicide also murder. Now, there are other kinds of murders that we can commit, which are not really treated as murder, but they should be treated as murder. At least in God's eyes, they are treated as murder. And that is if you cause a death of someone because of your carelessness or negligence, you are guilty of murder. Or if a man sells drugs, the hallucination drugs, substandard products, adulterated food or drink, can also be considered a murder. Or if a son or daughter deliberately harasses his or her aged parents by their behavior, killing them by degrees, that can be considered one of the blackest kind of murders. And I spoke about that when I talked about giving the incidents of, when I talked about honoring your parents. Some people actually kill their parents, not physically, but mentally and emotionally. And it's interesting that this particular commandment comes soon after the commandment of honor your parents. The sixth commandment, the fifth commandment is talking about honor your parents. Interesting that it comes soon after that. Using abusive language on parents, showing disrespect or raising a hand to hit them can amount to murder in God's sight. So we have to train our children that they should be careful not to raise their hands on adults, because this can lead to something even more serious later on in life. I remember when I was small, I remember this very distinctly. I was so angry with my mother that I gave her one slap on a foot. Boy, she beat me so badly. Not without hurting me as such, but she took a cane and she whipped me with that cane like I never got a whipping in my life before. I never did that mistake again. Never. So we need to train our children, and sometimes it requires us to be firm in what we do, because one thing can lead to another, and before we know it, just like Patricia said about anger, if we do not deal with our anger, it can lead to even murder. Yesterday in the paper it talked about a man who actually transferred his property into his wife's name, and then his wife decided to divorce him. He got so angry that he stabbed her and stabbed his mother-in-law and his daughter out of anger. That is where he allowed that anger to blow up. Maybe so many other things happened in the past, blow up, and he did what he was not supposed to do. He allowed the devil to get hold of him. Satan wants you dead. Okay, each and every one of you dead. He wants you dead. He doesn't want you alive, because you are a potential son or daughter of God, and he wants you to destroy you physically as well as spiritually and in every way possible. He wants you dead. We should not give Satan a chance to get hold of us. Matthew chapter 5 verses 21 to 22.
You have heard that it was said to the people long ago, do not murder, and anyone who murders will be subject to judgment. But I tell you that anyone who is angry with his brother will be subject to judgment. Again, anyone who says to his brother, back up, is answerable to the Samaritan. And anyone who says you fool will be in danger of the fire of God.
Yeah, there are here in this is an interesting verse. It shows 3 degrees of murderous guilt that is mentioned here. And all this without raising a hand, without going into violence. It is still considered murder. Secret anger, the spiteful jeer, and the open unrestrained outburst of violent abusive speech. If you translate this, in Message Bible it says, "You are familiar with the command to the ancients, do not murder. I am telling you that anyone who is so much as angry with his brother or sister is guilty of murder. Carelessly call a brother idiot, and you just might find yourself hauled into court. Thoughtlessly yelling stupid at a sister, and you are on the brink of hellfire. The simple moral fact is that words kill. The simple moral fact is that words kill. We can actually kill people by our words, and so we have to watch our words also. John, if you turn to 1 John chapter 3 verse 15.
Anyone who hates a brother or sister is a murderer, and you know that no murderer has eternal life residing in him.
And you see how serious this can be. I think all of us have been guilty at some time or the other of all this, and we need to repent before God, because He forgives us. He knows it's not easy to keep His commandments, and He doesn't really expect us to keep all the commandments perfectly, because none of us can ever keep the commandments perfectly. But He wants us to try, and He gives us every possible support we can, provided we try. Provided we are aware of it. Like just Patricia was talking about anger. He says one of the ways to deal with anger is to be aware of it. Don't ignore it. Don't actually sweep it under the carpet or say it doesn't really exist. You get angry and accept the fact that you do get angry. All of us do. And then you need to know how to deal with it, because that's what God is looking at. He looks at the heart. He wants to see us want to deal with it. He wants to see us want to be righteous. Now, we're not always going to be that way, but He wants us to try. Because when we are in the kingdom, if we program our minds to want to do the right thing, when we are in the kingdom, we will do the right thing perfectly. Okay, but if we decide that, oh well, let's see how far we can go in doing the wrong, let's stay on the edge. Let's put one foot on the good side and one foot on the bad side. You're going to sink. It's like putting your 2 feet in 2 boats. You'll sink, because the boats will go on the other side and you'll sink. We need to stay on track. The latest Living Light magazine, as the focus of the magazine goes along this line, so it will help you quite a bit, I would feel. You turn to Mark chapter 7 verses 20 to 23. Mark 7 verses 20 to 23. Mark 7, 20 to 23.
He went on, what comes out of a person is what defiles them. For it is from within, out of a person's heart, that evil thoughts come: sexual immorality, theft, murder, adultery, greed, malice, deceit, lewdness, envy, slander, arrogance, and folly. All these evils come from inside and defile a person.
Yeah, it's our it comes from inside. Actually, the Message Bible says all these are vomit from the heart. Okay, he puts it in a really graphic way. It starts from inside, and it comes out in some form or the other. If we are not careful and if we don't deal with the situation, it is a source of your pollution. It says it's again part of the translation in the Message Bible. So we need to deal with this, because if we don't, and this anger and forgiveness, forgiveness is an antidote to anger. If we learn to forgive somebody, we will not be angry with that person. and we need to learn to do that. I'll tell you a story. This is a true story. It's from history. This is part of the history of Canada. There was a tribe, one of the largest tribes in Canada, and this is talking about specifically of a place called Alberta, Canada. There is a tribe of Red Indians called the Cree tribe, the Cree, C-R-E tribe. They lived in Canada and North America. There was a great chief of that Cree tribe by the name of Chief Maskipetun, that is his name. And he met a missionary by the name of Reverend Robert Rundle. He's a well-known missionary who lived at that time. He did a lot of work among the Canadians and the North Indians and converted a lot of Red Indians to the Christian faith. When the Reverend Rundle met this man, Maskapitun, in the first few meetings, he tried to tell him about Jesus Christ. But this man said, I will never become a Christian as long as there are horses to steal and scalps to take. You know what scalps are? No, they actually, when a Red Indian would kill a person, they would scalp that person, and that was a trophy. So he says, so long as there are horses and scalp to take, I will not become a Christian. Nevertheless, Maskapitun became a staunch friend of Rundle, and Rundle did not force him to change or his religion. He just became his friend, and his attitude towards the Christianity changed over a period of time. And he was a great warrior and much feared warrior, but he also became a Christian later on and a champion of peace. This man. Later on, his successor to Reverend Robert Rundle was a man by the name of John McDougall, and he of course was introduced to Maskapitun by Rundle. He was his good friends. One day when John McDougall was visiting one of the villages, he was along with Chief Maskapitun, and he went to a village, and there was several people that were there, and John told this man, "Here, this man, shake his hand. You know, he wants to be your friend." So he shook his hand, and he didn't say anything. He reluctantly shook his hand. Okay, this man actually reluctantly shook his hand while he was while he was with John. After he left that village, he told John, he says, "This man wants, this man." He said, "You asked me to shake this man's hand." He said, "Do you know who this man is? This man killed my son." He said, "This man killed my son." He said, "A few years ago, I would have longed to get hold of this man and actually drink his blood." That was revenge for what he had done. And I can't imagine that I actually shook his hand. And he said, "You know what? Meeting you and meeting your father," he called the person who was there, his father, softened my heart. And now I gave him my hand. The story continues that on another occasion, the Crees were camped in another place to fight against a tribe of the Blackfoot. They were also a very powerful tribe, and they decided to stop fighting and have a truce. The truce was granted, and when the truce was granted between two Red Indian tribes, they smoked the peace pipe. That was a sign of, if you read about the Western district, you'll know about all these things. So they came together to smoke the peace pipe. One of the people in that group, an elderly man, had actually murdered Maskapitun's father years earlier. What Maskapitun did was, he summoned all these people there, including that tribe, asked this man to come before him. And he's a chief, so he has the power to do that. He brought his best horse and made it stand in front of this man, his best clothing and his best feathers. And he put the clothing on this man and the feathers on his head. He said, "I think you know who you are, and I think I know who you are. You are the murderer of my father, and you deserve to die, he said. But I am not going to kill you. I have forgiven you. He said, but I have lost my father, so you are now going to become my father. You are going to go to the village, your village and your people, and declare to them that you are Master Putun's father. And you know what this man said? This man said, this is the greatest revenge you can ever take on me. He says, what you've done is unheard of anywhere in all my culture. This is what you've done. You've given me your best clothing, you've given me your best horse, and you say, you be my father, when I was a killer of your father. And this was the revenge that Master Putun took on this man. There is another man, or rather, not even a man, he's much, much more, call him man, but he's much, much more than man. There is God, who has done exactly the same thing. God, we killed God's son by our sin, haven't we? All of us are responsible for the death of Jesus Christ, his son. We have broken the commandments of God. And what did God do? He confronted us and he told us, you are the murderer of my son. I give you this rope, I give you this crown, you are now going to take my son's place. That's what God has done to us. Amazing as it sounds, that's what he has done. You know, you can see how important it is for us to keep the laws of God. We cannot afford to murder someone else, because he is a son of God or a daughter of God, and we are depriving God of that son or daughter. Or in some way, he will still be a son or daughter of God, of course, but we are depriving that person to reach his full potential while he is on this earth. Because God has got a training ground. This is a training ground for us. He's got a plan of what training he has to give us. Jesus Christ gave us that indication when he said, I'm leaving you, I'm going to heaven. I am going to prepare a place for you, because it's not places for you, one place for you. Already right now God has a place for you. And only you can fit that place. But before you fit that place, he has to train you so that you can take that place. Amazing when you think about it. That's why it's so important the commandments of God are. You cannot kill anyone. We have no right to do that. Whether it is by action, whether it is by thought, or whether we feel it in our hearts. We have to learn to forgive one another. Because you know what? If we don't, it hits. We are killing ourselves. We are destroying ourselves. Not the other person, we are destroying ourselves. So it's so important for us to deal with our anger. It's so important for us to deal with what is the result of anger, which could be murder. We have to deal with that also. So let us remember this, and let us try to be better sons and daughters of God, because that's really what we are. Let's bow our heads and pray. Our great God, our eternal Father in heaven, we thank you for your love for us. We know, Father, that what you have planned for us even before you created this earth was an immense plan, a plan where we do not deserve to fit in. We have not even scratched the surface of being what we should be as your sons and daughters. We've done nothing whatsoever to earn this position. As a matter of fact, we've done everything possible to disqualify ourselves from this position. But because of your great love for us, Father, this unconditional love, this stubborn love that you have for us, we can still call you our Father, and you call us your sons. We killed your Son Jesus Christ, Father, but you made us your sons along with him to be with us, you in the kingdom. We thank you for that, Father. We thank you for the great privilege and honor that we have to do so. We ask you, Father, to do our very best to diligently be like your sons and daughters, diligently behave like your sons and daughters, diligently learn to love one another, and allow you to work in us so that we truly learn to love one another as you have loved us. We thank you for all the great opportunities and the blessings you give us, Father. We ask you to continue to do so, continue to guide us, continue to lead us. and to help us so that we can receive the training that you want to give us, and so that we can fit in that position you want to us to have in your kingdom. Help us, Father, not to hinder other people or other Christians or other people outside the world, in the world, from developing their full potential through you and with your help. Help us, Father, to facilitate that transformation in other people also and in ourselves, and allow others to help facilitate the transformation in us. We thank you for all that you do for us, Father, for your love for us, your deep concern for us, and for the things you are doing in our life. We thank you for all that. And we ask all this in Jesus' holy and most blessed name.